Welcome back to Simon and Whiten, the podcast at the crossroads of media, business, and politics. I'm Christian Whiten, joined as always by Mark Simon. It looks like he's coming to us from a tropical location. Mark, where are you?
I am down in Florida. I'm in southern Florida right now. So
you could have said Bali or jungles of Cambodia, and I would have believed.
This is what it looks like at 6 p.m. in Florida. You know, I am not next to Mar-a-Lago, just in case anybody's asking. I am not there. I'm a little bit further north.
Very good. Yeah. Well, that's good because the FBI is hogging up all the parking down at Mar-a-Lago. So
no kidding. How are you?
All right. Good. Well, news, as there always is, out of China and Hong Kong. Hong Kong falling behind Singapore in a ranking by Bloomberg, at least reported by Bloomberg, of financial capitals. New York and London are still number 1 and 2. Who knows for how long, but Singapore, I believe, is 3. Hong Kong falling behind. Dubai coming up. Interestingly, the UAE has the problem of dividing finance between Abu Dhabi, the capital, and Dubai, the financial capital, but clearly a much-deserved downgrade for Hong Kong. What else is going over in China? We have the lead up to the Communist Party Congress once every 5 years. This one will further anoint Xi Jinping, the dictator, as someone who will be able to serve a somewhat unprecedented third term for the first time since Deng or Mao. But Mark, it seems to me the Chinese really want to have their cake and eat it too. And I know you've said and written a lot on this, where they sort of want to be our enemy, but they sort of want a whole lot of stuff from us. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that the business community has always relied on, at least when I was, doing business with China and I'm, and seen for years, is essentially this Kissinger type position where basically there are hardliners in the Chinese government and then there's everybody else. And so we have to make the hardliners pay attention and we have to have a discussion with them. But basically 90% of our life, we will do everything else with them. So, for example, we can trade, we can have their kids come over to go to school, they can come to Disneyland, they can do anything they want with our tech companies, they can list, they can do all these wonderful things, they can do anything they want. But we still have the hardliners, and we just have to not pay attention to them because China is no longer a communist nation, and they're really not aggressive. And that was the line for years. The Chinese are the ones who've told us different. I mean, Christian, you often said, we just got to listen to the bad guys, and they tell us what they're going to do. And, what they've told us is essentially, let's look at this now. Xi Jinping has been basically in power for, coming up on 12. He's launching his next 6-year term. He's made the U.S. the evil person in what things? First of all, in Taiwan, the rhetoric in Taiwan with the U.S. is way higher than what it used to be with China in terms of like the conversation. For example, in the old days, basically the only time you ever heard a bunch of crap from the Chinese was when we sold arms. Okay, now it's constant, and it's constantly the U.S. is this, the U.S. is destabilizing that. Then what you look at what they're doing in the Southern Pacific, in the Solomon Islands, and also in Southeast Asia, where they're actually going out and they're challenging us. So you have that. And then, of course, there is Hong Kong, where Hong Kong wants to have what? They want to have a relationship with the world, okay, financially. They want JP Morgan there. They want everybody to be there. They want all their businesses to do well. China wants everything to happen. But China, through me and also, but really Jimmy Lai, my boss, through everybody, China is doing what? I mean, the U.S. is doing what? They're basically leading a color revolution. So in other words, you walk into a room and you say, oh, I'd like to do business with you. And then in the old days, I'd like to do business with you. And we got these nut jobs over here on the right, these hardliners we have to deal with. Whereas, I should say the left, but on the other side, now we've got this situation where they're saying, I hate you, I hate you, I need you, I hate you, I need you, I hate you, I need you. In other words, it's not going to work. And there's no way to move forward from that because there's nothing that they want to deal with us on now. So, for example, Hong Kong used to allow a very free and open press. They do not allow that anymore. There is open knowledge and open discussion in the international press newsrooms about what they can cover and what they can't. If you do a big expose on the Hong Kong democracy movement or on Xi Jinping, you're going to have trouble. That used to not be the case. It was pretty much wide open. So and why are they doing that? Because basically, again, they want to have their cake and eat it too. It's a very difficult thing for the Chinese to understand. Over here, I think most of us are fully content that while Kissinger's not dead, he's basically just a stuffed suit over in the corner. There's very few people who give Kissinger his due anymore. I think one of the worst things about Trump in foreign policy, and I think Trump's foreign policy was overall a success, was this deference that Trump had to Kissinger, although he never listened to him, you know what I'm saying? But he gave Kissinger what he needed, the FaceTime, to make money in China still. The Kissinger model is dead. There's no longer that model dealing with China. And people forget it was that Kissinger model that enabled U.S. business to operate in China. Because again, it was like we can work with the good guys and just hold off the bad guys. Now, that difference is no there. There's no longer hardliners in China. They're all hardliners. And what I mean by that, there's no longer segments.
Well, it's interesting if you take, and I know some hardcore realists and consider myself a bit of one, an affiliation with the Center for the National Interest. If you apply Kissingerian theory to China, then take the world for what it is. And what made sense perhaps in China during the Cold War when the primary adversary was the Soviet Union, and it made sense to try and cleave off communist China, and we had just lost in Vietnam, or we're in the process of doing so. That's very different than the situation in 1991, and different than the situation in 2000 when China got into the WTO, and certainly different than 2016 or today. So it's interesting that some people aren't adapting, but most people seem to be. Looking ahead, we're seeing some of we still have midterm elections to get through in November, but we're starting to see some of the early cumulus clouds of the storm coming of the 2024 presidential election. Do you think, just looking at the candidates, especially on the Republican side, that we're going to go a couple more notches into skepticism on China?
Yeah, I think there's almost no chance that it doesn't develop into basically a worse relationship. I think across the board now, America has made a decision about Taiwan. I do not believe that Joe Biden is misspeaking every single time Taiwan comes up informally. I think in formal things, when he sits there, oh yes, that's it. But in interviews where he's asked the question, he's not that out of it. 3 times he said, we will defend Taiwan. He's sending a message. It's the game they're playing. It's no different than when Reagan did this little, we're going to bomb you in 5 minutes and all this stuff. And then the guys come out and walk it back. Or, you make a hard line. I think it's become very clear that on the Democratic side of the aisle, in the non-crazy world, and on the Republican side of the aisle, I think Taiwan is basically a finished foreign policy settlement, but for really 2 reasons. The first reason is Japan, and I think the Japanese are certainly going to fight. I think, and I think it'll be with us, not without us, but I think because, they'll move in, Japan will be attacked, and we don't have an option in that defense treaty. In other words, they get attacked, we're going. And the second thing is Southeast Asia. Because if we do not defend Taiwan, we might as well just pick up and leave Southeast Asia, because everyone's going to cut their deal in about 5 seconds. It will be the 1950s Finlandization of an entire region, and the U.S. will be out. And it's one of the things that I think people really have to understand. We do have a capable adversary there, and the idea that we can still have. It's why I hate fawn ops, these freedom of navigation ops. They're bullshit. I mean, it's like, we've ceded everything, but we're still going to sail our little boat through there, you know what I'm saying, and prove that we matter. The only thing those fawn ops are is a targeting exercise for the Chinese, because the moment they decide they don't want us to go there, you're not going to go. And it pushes you out of everything. How about some serious foreign policy and some serious engagement is, I think, what has to happen. But no, I think that really, when I look around, who are our potential candidates? Pompeo is certainly putting his name in there. DeSantis certainly moving in there. but also on the right. I mean, I have a real belief that on the left, there's no appetite by Kamala Harris. I don't think Biden's going to run. I think by Kamala Harris, I think by Newsom, I think by all these other people, what we're starting to see is a left that starts to understand that the appetite of the American people with China is to be a little bit tougher. And so I think it's not so much a political move. I think it's the people of the country. People have seen a threat in China now. They now see it, and it's an odd thing.
Right. Speaking of politics, let's dial it back to the midterms. It seems like there has been a shift. I was pontificating a few weeks ago that there have been two fake rallies over the summer. One was in the stock market, which I think was a bear market rally. That was the triumph of hope over reality. And the others was that Republicans were fading, the Democrats were surging, that what had caused Republicans to jump ahead in polls in the spring were just not that much of an issue anymore, or were put in perspective, and that the ruling that ended Roe versus Wade had energized the left, and Biden's success in passing, or at least in getting to yes with Joe Manchin, another pork bill. Anyway, that seems to be out the door. If you look at polls and if you look at momentum, Nevada, not previously thought to be a strong candidate for pickup Laxalt, who it's a famous name in Nevada politics. It looks like the newer Laxalt, who's running for Senate, may have a pretty good shot. Governor there. The GOP candidate in Arizona, who was seen as sort of significantly behind, now is looking a little better. And Pennsylvania, polls show that Dr. Oz is now, certainly within striking distance, maybe ahead of Fetterman. I'm curious, do you see this surge as well? And do you think it might extend to another place you've done a lot of business, is New York, which seems sort of hopelessly lost? And you worry that a lot of the people who would vote for change are actually just leaving the state. But what do you think? Do you think that there is sort of a Republican surge going on?
I don't think it's as much of a surge as I think it's just basically just a constant momentum. You know what I'm saying? In other words, it really hasn't stopped. And they've had all these opportunities. I mean, Lindsey Graham's brain dead move with, abortion the other day on the national. I mean, what was he even thinking? You don't run it by your other senators. That's not a very nice thing to do. So I think that this point in time, I'm actually reasonably encouraged that, you look at Arizona, McMaster is surging there. I think the real issue in Arizona is Mark Kelly, the current Democratic senator, doesn't want to be senator anymore. I think he'd rather go out and make money, rather have a private life. He's the guy's been to space how many times? He's a fighter pilot, sitting in the U.S. Senate, where he's basically on the low man on the totem pole. You know what I'm saying? It is not an exciting place for a guy at this stage in his life. The other thing is that I think Vance is well ahead. The whole thing is there's no way that you have Dr. Oz, who's not a very good candidate, moving up. Herschel Walker is now pretty much 3 or 4 points ahead in the polls there. And all these other Republicans kind of surging in, what would be purple areas. And there's not a national move. People are not going like, by God, I'm going to go ahead and vote for Stacey Abrams, but I'm also going to walk over here and pull that vote for Herschel Walker. It's not the way it works. and we've also seen, too, in some of the big red states, that's where the Democrats are really falling apart. I mean, Beto is basically just losing money left, right, and center. But one of the other things that I think is so impressive here, and I hate to quote Ramos, but, Jorge Ramos, from Telemundo or whatever it is, the famous Hispanic journalist, who came from Mexican journalist. His daughter's actually pretty smart, unlike him, and he's an idiot. But the fact is she's pointed out Hispanics are now flowing into the Republican Party, and it's not just walking; they're flowing. I think this cycle down here in Florida is going to prove it. Look, I'm here in Florida. Today, I dealt with 4 companies, okay, and it's really construction work and things like that I'm looking at, all Hispanic controlled. These guys are not woke in any way, shape, or form, okay? They want to earn money and work, okay? They like Florida. I had a guy in halting English tell me, "Oh, you come down from New Jersey. You have high taxes there." He knows. You know what I'm saying? The guy knows. What's happening across America for the Democrats is really a rejection of this race conscious wokeness that only, I hate to say it, rich white kids who've never had a minority in their, in their world before think this is okay. I went to a high school that was about as multicultural as it could come. I think the white kids, I think we were about 65% in Falls Church, you know what I'm saying? But inside that 65% was, Lithuanians, Syrians, it was a pretty diverse group. And my point is like, you can't really come down and say, okay, all white males and all this and all that are these things, such as the left does. And the point that I'm making is that the left tries to put people in boxes, and then they move forward on their strategies from that. It's theory. And the simple fact is, how many Venezuelans have come in the last year? 1 million? You think those people are down with socialism? In other words, if those Venezuelans would have stayed in Martha's Vineyard, you put 1,000 Venezuelans in Martha's Vineyard, it goes from blue to purple. It's because we know how they're going to vote. You know what I'm saying? And so the thing is like the biggest issue with the GOP right now, and I still come back to it in New Jersey. New Jersey just got a new sex education guide. Okay, it's as crazy as it's as crazy as anything as you've ever seen. It's just nuts. But the governor, Murphy, who's a Goldman Sachs, Democrat who loves the Democratic Party, and he loves the Mets and all that stuff. He plays this role. He's getting out of the way because the woke, he doesn't want to get in the word of the woke. But who's really down with that in the recent immigrants that have shown up in New Jersey? Nobody. But what did the Republicans do? When we had a chance in 2021 to run somebody, instead of running this wonderful Indian American, a huge success story coming to the U.S. for the governorship, would have been the first, Indian in the Northeast in a blue state. We ran basically, a guy who basically had an Oompa band with him. Jack Valenti or whatever his name is, Granddad Jack. He had his commercial was like watching a guy who's selling mobile homes. It was so bad. And there's no diversity. And where the party has no diversity, that's where we fall into the lines there. So I'll try to tie it together and just say, look, what I'm seeing in this tide, I think the thing that comes out of this, I'm not sure the Republicans take the Senate. I don't know if there's enough of Dr. Oz to really drive him over. I think he's doing well, but I think we'll do well in other races. So I think maybe we take the House by 30, 35, 40 seats, you know what I'm saying, which would be pretty good. I think we make inroads in certain places. But what's going to come out of this election for 2024 is you're going to see, I believe, you're going to see the largest move of Hispanics and other traditional Democratic bases than we've ever seen. Not so sure about African Americans yet, but certainly with Asian Americans and certainly with Hispanic Americans, we're going to see a giant shift coming up. I think it's going to be significant.
This was their whole plan. It was their big plan, but their only plan too. And some people have been called racist for espousing replacement theory, but it was the Democrats' plan. The idea that combination of millennials who incidentally are now getting older and not as liberal, but that growing Hispanic populations, less so with Asian and other minorities, that they're just going to be Democrats. And you saw it in California, what was once a Republican state. Hey, Ronald Reagan won that twice, Richard Nixon won it twice, George Bush, H.W. Bush won it the first time.
Well, let me ask you, you're from Idaho and you live in Colorado. This is not, diversity is just kind of accepted out there, right? Your partner is Chilean, you know what I'm saying? He's not exactly, is that like the non-woke, he doesn't count as Latinx or something like that, or whatever it is? I don't know.
I've yet to meet a single Hispanic,
I've,
Latino, whatever, who goes by Latin. I don't even know how you pronounce it. Is it Latinx,
I've
Latins,
met
Latinx?
them because I've been on my kid's college campus, and there's like women walking around with the shirts. And I asked one of my son's friends who's Hispanic, what do you think of it? And he was like, and I think he knew my politics, and he was like, he goes, it's ridiculous. But and I think he was a Democrat. Kid's a Democrat, but even he says it's ridiculous. Look, I got to tell you, I do believe overall that um, the real issue that we're going to get back to in the coming years is essentially the economy. We just had a 75 basis point jump. Goldman is probably correct. We're going to get another one in November, 75 basis points. Then what happens in January or whatever? Do they skip December, see how that goes because of Christmas, which is not unprecedented? And do they, do a 50 basis point in June? There's going to be a lot of hurt and pain going on out here coming this year. Quite frankly, if I was the Democrats, I'd want the Republicans to be in the House. People say, oh, why would you want that? Because I'd want someone to own it. Because let me tell you something. If the economy keeps going the way it's going and it's not recovering, 2024 will be, as long as we run, they will pray that Donald Trump runs because that's the only guy that'll have a chance again. But I don't see it happening. I think we're going to be in such bad shape, no matter who's in office, really, in 2023. I think it's going to be awful. I think 2023 is really going to be a significantly bad year for people.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Fed Chairman Powell does seem to be sticking to his guns, at least for now. The statement wasn't just we're raising interest rates by 0.75%, but also that we're going to continue shrinking the Fed balance sheet. That's this enormous amount of U.S. debt, mortgages, and sort of agency debt that they accumulated. They bought all this stuff up, injecting dollars into the economy, which created this huge ocean of dollars, which is still sloshing around today. And they're going to continue to let that run off. The last time that happened, which was just a little bit, I think around 2018, 2019, the market tanked. The economy dropped from that 3% growth that Trump had achieved. It started to look worse. All this got blown away by COVID, of course, but it's starting to look, we don't have Paul Volcker. We don't have someone who's just going to relentlessly raise rates as much as necessary, if necessary, to go above the inflation rate just to get this under control. But we do have someone who seems to be sticking to his guns, at least for now. The market bet against him, thought he would wimp out. The market was wrong and corrected as a result. But what we don't have is the other side of what happened in the early 80s, which is Ronald Reagan and his supply side reforms. So you had this force of the Fed arresting inflation. At the same time, you were invigorating the economy's animal spirits with deregulation and enormous tax cuts. So you're right. I mean, it seems like going into 2023, there's nothing great on the horizon. Basically, a Republican Congress, unless so if it's just the House, can say no to Joe Biden as far as tax hikes and some of the crazy spending, but they're going to have to get to some sort of agreement on a budget. So the idea, and Republicans aren't even running on tax cuts. So yeah, you think we are pretty well doomed going into
I think 2023 is doomed. I think I tell people all the time it's doomed. I can already see it in some of the guys I saw today who were very anxious. One guy told me, he said his biggest problem is getting material, ceiling tiles, for example. I mean, roofing tiles. And he said in the past month, all of a sudden, his major suppliers have said, well, if you're looking for this, we can change it because somebody canceled. We can move you up. You know what I'm saying? And that's because big jobs are slowing down. They're canceling, and they're trying to now also just, we're gonna. For example, I know one contractor. He's moving away from overtime, massive overtime, for his guys, because he's trying to get them back out so he can stretch his book of work out longer. The people on the ground see this a lot quicker than other folks. And, and I think what's going to happen, we're going to have real problems. And then there's the other thing, too, is like my younger brother, he's a health nut. As you can see, I am not. My younger brother, the health nut, he had a comment to me the other day. He said, Mark, I buy a lot of these big baked potatoes. He said, that's like my kind of go-to carb thing when I want. He said, I noticed the other day, he said, he buys like these one of the, like the bag of 8, top quality, whatever. He said, that bag used to cost me $6. He said, now that bag costs me 11. And he said, that's hurting. And, when you're talking to people and you're seeing people, I donate money to a food bank. And, you can see in the emails that you're getting, you can see in the things happening, they're getting a little bit more business. They're getting a little bit more people coming by, and the people are worried. Now, part of that, by the way, in our area, the area I'm going into, is because of a lot of these new illegal immigrant migrants who essentially show up, and we can talk about that later, about how they come in. But yeah, I mean, you're going to have, by September 30th, you're going to have 4.7 or whatever million people who've come in the last, since the Biden administration, illegally. These people, a lot of them are still struggling quite a bit. You know what I'm saying? And so they're draining the lower level resources, the on the street resources, the food banks, the housing of homeless and things like that. They're putting a lot of pressure on these systems. That's why in New York City they're flipping out, and of course Martha Vineyard is a different story. But no, Kristen, I think we're going to see a lot of pressure, and I think that's going to be I think that's going to change. We'll see what happens in 2022 this fall. I'm confident, like I said, the Republicans will take the House. I think that surge is moving along there. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in other places. And by the way, one other thing for foreign investors: watch who wins the governorships. If Whitmer wins in Michigan, sell Michigan. It's almost like that. It's almost like you're going to have to play around. Abbott is going to win in Texas. DeSantis is going to win in Florida. Kemp's going to win in Georgia. You know what I'm saying? These people who are winning these seats, these governor seats, these Republicans, they are not going to pull a Chris Christie. No one's going to go and all of a sudden start running a national campaign and start getting liberal. DeSantis will probably start running, but he's going to stay with the same policies that he's had. And you're going to have Youngkin. And there is going to be an exodus like people have never seen from some of these blue states coming up as the blue states double down, especially places like Illinois, New York, unless Zeldin wins. I hope he wins in New York State. I think there's a good chance he will. If he does, that could fix a lot.
Yeah, it would certainly stop some of the damage. You'd be dealing with an extremely hostile state legislature. This is sort of the problem of Chris Christie, or when Arnold won in California, when Pataki was governor in New York. I guess he was the last Republican governor. He had at least one house in the legislature on his side for a little while, if memory serves. Although, frankly, in Albany, you have Republicans and Democrats, and they all seem depressingly to.
They're all corrupt. They're all corrupt.
There's that. But it's better than the opposite, which is, if you have a somber piano player in the whorehouse as opposed to one who's a louche, then, I guess that's a positive.
One of the things is you can also bring New York back to what we were talking about with Hong Kong, being, was it number 3 and number 4 now, whereas you have New York, London, Hong Kong, Singapore. Really, one of the things you get if Lee Zeldin wins is when you look at these financial centers, I've always kind of looked at it in a different way. So, for example, if you look at New York is really a financial hub. And what I mean by that is it's got everybody. It's got Warren Buffett out there. It's got all these people in Chicago, and everything comes up through this pipeline throughout the country. It's connected throughout all of the country, including Canada, you know what I'm saying, and also Latin America and South. It all comes up through New York. There's a free flow up through New York because you've got basically, in most parts, you've got democracies, you've got capitalist systems, although we question Canada. We've got all these, we've got the system that flows up. New York, London has what? London has Europe. Okay. And so all of Europe kind of can flow up through London. In fairness, Singapore actually has Southeast Asia, even India a bit, you know what I'm saying? But Dubai doesn't really have that much other than oil money coming in, and Hong Kong has nothing. Hong Kong is like this rock, and around it is all rock on the outside. There's no pipes that are going into China that are feeding things in, other than what? Money. And people say it only takes, money is what matters. No, it's not. There's a lot of things that make a financial center. So if Lee Zeldin whatever his name is, if he can win in New York, he can stop this crazy tide. If not, Kristen, if not, I suggest that New York is not a needed place for the U.S. financial system. In other words, the idea that whole network.
Let me jump in because I worked as an intern. I'm dating myself. This would be a long time ago. In the summer of '95, junior year, I was at Oppenheimer and Co. when it was still just a normal bulge bracket, just normal investment bank. It wasn't as big as Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch, but it did everything. And even then, I thought, wow, just the price of doing business in New York, the annoyance of being here. You have these huge commercial banks like Bank of America, which was gobbling up other commercial banks that eclipsed the size of the investment banks. And then you had the Clinton era reforms, which did away with, I'm going to forget the name of it, but the Depression era law that said that investment banking and commercial banking were separate. That was worn down. So I thought, oh, this is a no-brainer. I mean, they're going to take the name and they're going to move it to Charlotte, and Charlotte's going to be New York. Didn't happen. Hasn't happened, but maybe it is starting to. And Miami is turning up. Palm Beach, a little bit south of where you are, is a huge fund for the hedge fund guys. San Francisco, not the city, but the peninsula, still just with the amount of tech money out there. So do you think, basically, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying New York actually, if Zeldin is elected, if he calls off, hopefully this attorney general goes as well. I don't know if she's up for election, but perhaps he can at least put a crimp on her anti-business activities, and you could stop this diffusion of American finance across the fruited plain.
I think if they don't get him, I think it's over. One of the things that people forget that was really disheartening, and it's going to happen, is really in New York City, the primary is the actual election. In other words, there's no general election. It's the primary, the Democratic primary. Look who won in the Democratic primary in New York City. All hard left candidates, all anti-business, all people. And, the thing is, like I'm saying, I am pretty close to West Palm Beach. And I'm telling you, the place is filling up down here. And the reason why is people know what's happening. You're in Colorado. People are going to be looking at L.A. and San Francisco. One of these days, Gavin Newsom's going to run out of IPO money. I'm a firm believer in that. You know what I'm saying? And once that happens, once it starts to go down, we'll have to see. I mean, it's like Apple. The greatest mistake Apple ever made, in my mind, was building that monstrosity of a headquarters that now they just don't know how to get out of. And they can't. Their employees don't. The best employees don't want to live there. And so the thing is you had a very good term. You're very correct. There's a diffusion. So the way I look at it is right now, the oil head in New York is open, and it's popping out. But you know what? That system that's all over, as you use the term fruited plains, that stuff can pop up anywhere now. And so the simple fact of the matter is, why is it necessary, other than for the morning show on CNBC, why is it necessary to be in New York City to do a deal? It's not. And
yeah,
New York City,
I still don't know what those traders are doing on the floor. I didn't know really what they were doing back when they were actually trading. I sort of did, like in trading places when it was still commodities and you'd scream something and someone write down your badge number and all that. But things happen like that now. And I guess with big blocks, then they say, okay, maybe a human in the loop does things. But I look at these and I love CNBC. They have the frowny face when the market is down, and they have the happy face traders when the market's up. And I have no idea what they're doing.
I think so much of it is just, it's theater, but in fairness to them, it's very effective theater. It's basically people walking through, ringing the bell at the NASDAQ, doing all these things. Here we are down at the NASDAQ or down at the NYSE, and it's like, so be it. It's theater. But these guys, they have this conceit, and it's a journalist conceit about New York, is that somehow if we're here, you have to be here. And I'm telling you, that's not the case. And Hong Kong is going to learn that too, is that as they're putting up barriers around the city, they don't really understand the problems of what they're having. In other words, there's really no fruited plain. It's like the gray, dark forest of, some bad Disney film across that border. There's nothing coming over there. And as Dubai can tell you, is oil money can pump in all day long, but that still doesn't pump in economic activity and power, you know what I'm saying, and economic creation. So I myself, I think there's a lot of reasons why things should go there. And also, I'm trying to remember the political guy who said, you know, I can't remember the political theorist who said, you want your enemies in your boat with you when you're going over the falls. You know what I'm saying? So in 2023, you know, Joe Biden wants to be able to stand there. I cannot get Speaker McCarthy to work with me on these bills. And then people go, oh, this is the Republicans who are causing all this problem. If it's all Democrats and that hill's going over, you know what I'm saying? Then that's it. And by the way, I mean, I'll show my colors here. It's one of the reasons why I just think that Trump is such a distraction. I saw his interview the other night on Hannity just because I wanted to see it. The president's not talking to the former president's not talking to the American people anymore. And he's basically talking his book. You know, it's his issues. It's about him, that if you don't save him, I'm fighting for you. You've got to save me. I don't see that happening. I think people are seeing, DeSantis basically coming up. I think people are seeing other governors do things. In Virginia, for example, I can tell you right now, without a doubt, in Virginia, Youngkin would win. You know, people are that happy with him right now. You know, other than the guys who are driving up and down the street with their Trump flags and their pickup trucks. And I mean that as an insult. If people really know that, I really mean it. Would you just get out of the truck? Would you stop waving the flag and set up a voter registration booth or something? You know what I'm saying? Do something other than jump up and down and scream. I've never seen anything like it. It's the one thing I'll give the Bernie Sanders people and the Democrats. One of the things that I'll let you go, but one of the things about Bernie Sanders in 2016, I was out there when I was still helping Apple Daily arrange coverage for the election. You know what I'm saying? The Bernie Sanders people were incredible. It was like February 2016, and they're out there registering people. And it's one of the things that people really don't understand about Bernie. Bernie is not just the left-wing socialist cause. He had a lot of people out there registering voters who became his supporters, you know, and I think that's the problem with Trump. All I see with Trump now is basically I've collected $140 million, $135 million, and I'm not spending a nickel. So, you know, on mid-level candidates, which is kind of a confusing point at the end of this, but, you know.
Well, it's a confusing system. All right, well, that's all the time we have for this episode, but we'll be back again with another edition of Simon and White. And if you like us, please subscribe. We'll be back again soon.